Happy Earth Day, April 22nd. For us, this is the fourth of 5 different presentations that we've organized for the week under the umbrella of Green Your Life. I'm still messing with the controls here, sorry.
I put the your message in the chat. So you want to say something about the chat?
Oh, sure.
I have questions in the chat.
Sure,
In fact,
great.
I put it in twice, so.
We encourage you to write questions in the chat, and we're going to answer questions at the end of our presentation. We have about 30 minutes of presentations, and maybe we'll stay whatever length we need to for Q&A. My name is Steve Miller.
And I'm Pat Miller, and I'm Steve's partner in life and in giving this talk.
That's right. It's 49 years anniversary in the last week. Happy anniversary, Pat.
Same to you.
So Pat and I are both retired engineers and communication managers at the former Bell Labs in New Jersey. We began this journey towards saving the world for our children and grandchildren, and it was a few years ago. I just got a 5-year reminder from Facebook, and we were saving the world 5 years ago. But 4 years ago, we trained as climate reality leaders, and we learned of the enormity of the climate crisis we face. So this week, we are participating along with thousands of others in Earth Week. And I just noted that President Biden today is doing Earth Week as well with, 40 different nations. And he's committed now to 50% reduction in greenhouse gas by 2030. I really applaud that. We're going to be talking about what we can do to green our lives to meet that objective. And that's 50% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. I will talk about the state of the climate crisis and also the new technology that's coming down the pike that we're going to use to dig ourselves out of our crisis. And then Pat and I will add to our own view of what the clean energy future will be like in 2050 and what we are personally going to get there. And then I'll turn over to Pat to cover that part. Our work is advised by both Climate Reality and the Sierra Club, Ready for 100 campaign you see here. Both are nonprofit organizations. We founded our local Middletown for Clean Energy when we decided that we could make the biggest direct impact by working to drive Middletown and other towns around us to 100% clean energy at the local level, because it's much more impactful to deal at a city level than a personal level. And our mission is to leave a legacy of a livable world for our children and grandchildren. And here is the reason that saving the world is so important to us personally. Here's our 2 grandsons. There are many sources of man-made global pollution: agriculture, forest fires, transportation, but the biggest source is the burning of fossil fuels. We know for a fact that the Earth is getting warmer. For the first time in our lifetimes, there is now an Arctic passage above Canada all year round. And as the air becomes warmer, it can hold more moisture. And this makes the downpours bigger, and we have stronger and more frequent storms that produce flooding. And we know this in New Jersey very, very acutely. Here is a city flooding scene in New Jersey in 2019. Now, that same extra heat that causes the stronger rainstorms and floods also causes droughts by sucking the moisture out of the topsoil, so droughts can take place more quickly. There was a massive drought last year in Europe. Poland had the worst drought in 100 years. The Czech Republic, the worst in 500 years. And heat causes fires, and fires have increased over the years. The U.S. West has been on fire the last couple of years in particular. This was California in 2020. This shows cities most at risk from sea level rise based on the dollars of assets. Miami is first, In our area, New York, Newark is third. Most of all, the affected cities are in Asia and are highly populated. Anything we can do now to prevent or slow the worst will be much less expensive than after it happens, and will save lives too. In New York and Newark, New Jersey, $130 billion of real estate assets are at risk. This is a FEMA map. The U.S. Department of Defense predicts that climate change will lead to food and water shortages, disease, and more refugees. And these were refugees that were coming from the Middle East and Eastern Europe, resulting since and after the Syrian drought and war. And also those coming to the U.S. now from Central America because of drought and political instability. The climate crisis is also a health crisis. Let's look at the pollution caused by burning fossil fuels. This is what the air looks like in parts of China. People can't breathe it. It also makes people more vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic all over the world. The more the air pollution, the higher the death rate from COVID-19. And again, we see this pattern show up worse among minority populations and poor populations. Black Americans are dying at a rate more than twice as high as white Americans from COVID-19. A big factor is the amount of air pollution in many minority neighborhoods. We now risk losing both marine and land-based species to extinction. Many of these are critical to human life, such as the bees that pollinate a huge portion of our food crops. We're ringing up the cost of carbon, political instability, floods and mudslides, wildfires, droughts, storm damage, ocean acidification, infrastructure loss, climate refugees, species extinction, melting glaciers, famine, water scarcity, ecosystem losses, and our way of life. Also infectious diseases and sea level rise. The number one threat to the global economy. But we do have the solutions at hand in form of clean energy technology. Look at the growing capacity of wind energy. With any new technology, the growth is often vastly more than predicted. Wind energy is growing exponentially. The New Jersey-New York bight off the New Jersey and Long Island coasts has been designated as a wind energy area by the Biden administration. New Jersey has plans to develop 7,500 megawatt of offshore wind in that bight by 2035. Solar is growing even faster than wind. The price of solar has been dropping for 40 years. It has dropped by 95% in the last 20 years. Solar and wind are now cheaper than fossil fuel and getting cheaper all the time. And batteries. Ideally, every wind or solar installation, whether rooftop solar or commercial size, will be paired with battery storage to capture the excess energy generated and feed it into the grid during less sunny or windy times. Look at the growth in battery storage over the last decade, and look at the projected growth over the next 2 decades. This next photo shows a huge Tesla battery wind farm in Australia, and I remember very acutely, like yesterday, Tesla announcing the world's largest at 150 megawatts. And yet a year later, or 2 years later, Tesla was second largest. Somebody erected a 250 megawatt battery in California. And this year in 2021, Tesla is trying to get back its winner's hat by partnering with a California utility to create a 730 megawatt battery. Note the capacity trend, starting with 150 to 250, now to 730 megawatts. This trend will continue. Let's look at transportation, the largest source of carbon pollution, responsible for almost half of all our emissions. Electric vehicles have become increasingly popular in the last several years. And all these auto manufacturers have EV models available today, and many of them have announced they will have only electric vehicles sometime in the decade between 2030 and 2040. So all this renewable technology and so much more is under development throughout the world. And now I turn it over to Pat and her crystal ball. Pat will enlighten us with what the future looks like.
Hi, again, I'm Pat Miller, and like Steve, I'm also a member of Middletown for Clean Energy. I'm a climate reality leader and member of Sierra Club Ready for 100. I'm also a member of the Middletown Green Team. So let's set our crystal ball sights on the future, 2050. How do we know we will get to net zero by then? And what will 2050 look like? It's going to be a lot different from today. Remember, we're counting on net zero carbon emissions by 2050 to preserve a livable world for our children and grandchildren. So we must and we will. And why do I believe this will happen? Because the tide is turning. More and more people believe it must happen and are demanding it. This is one of thousands of marches and rallies that were happening more than weekly until the pandemic cut short our ability to gather in large crowds. This was the big climate march in New York City in September 2019, in which Greta Thunberg spoke. We were there for that. And for the adults in the room, the market will drive this transition. It's going to happen. Oh, young people all over the world need it to happen. It's their future that's on the line. This was the same day as the New York City March. And now for the adults. The market will drive the transition. We couldn't stop it even if we were intent on saving fossil fuels, and we're not. A big reason is the cost. This is what has happened in just the last 10 years. Solar has been dropping for 40 years, and in just the last 10 years, I think my computer decided to record me. In just the last 10 years, it's dropped by more than half. Wind power and EVs have dropped by more than 75%. The price has dropped to the point that almost everywhere, clean energy is cheaper than fossil fuel. Why wouldn't people buy it, given a choice? And if you're still investing in fossil fuel energy stocks, you have been losing money for the last decade, and it will only get worse. 24 states, plus Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico, have committed to the U.S. Climate Alliance and are still in the Paris Agreement. They were never out. And the U.S. is back in. And as Steve mentioned, just today, President Biden announced that the U.S. is committed to drop its carbon emissions by at least 50% by 2030. So that's terrific. Europe has been building out wind power for 2 decades. New Jersey and New York have awarded contracts for offshore wind 15 miles off the coast. And it looks like federal permits will soon be forthcoming. New Jersey, as we said, is committed to 7,500 megawatts of offshore wind by 2035. Solar in the US is growing at 20% per year, which means it doubles every 4 years. There's enough solar power in the US to power over 10 million homes. New Jersey has been a leader for years. California now requires every home to have solar and energy efficiency measures. And we hope that this trend is adopted all over the US and all the states and all over the world for that matter, because we need to have this. A large solar field was completed at Six Flags amusement park near us. And this is part of that same solar field, a canopy over the parking lot. Similarly, Seabrook Village in Tinton Falls has 15 acres of solar. Central State Hospital in Freehold has 26 acres of solar on site. In Middletown, the town has applied for the Middletown train station to parking lot to be covered with a solar canopy as a community solar project. We talked about EVs becoming cheaper. Well, half the world's buses will be electric in 4 years. This is what they look like. We already have electric trucks. Anheuser-Busch is switching to electric delivery trucks and charging them with solar. And even electric airplanes will no longer need to feel guilty because of the huge carbon footprint of flying. Meanwhile, we personally have purchased carbon offsets for our air travel. Another innovation is tall buildings made of wood, which eliminates the huge carbon footprint of manufacturing steel and cement. It sequesters its own carbon and can be reused over and over. We're not destroying forests to do it. It's by managing the farming of forests and replanting what is harvested. And have no fear, investment in clean energy is not a job killer, as sometimes we've heard. Quite the opposite. Every dollar we invest in clean energy not only pays the people who will do the work, and that is creating jobs, whether it is researchers, installation technicians, or manufacturing, all of which is destined to be done in the US. It creates the value of an endless source of free energy and the devices to capture and use it. It is an investment. Even now, solar and wind technicians are the two fastest growing job categories in the US. Other changes. Building standards will need to be upgraded to zero emissions. Our appliances and furnaces will all be electric by 2050. Many more EV charging stations and longer range, faster charging batteries. Plastic packaging will be cut back to zero. More people will adopt plant-based diets, and we will no longer grow corn to burn ethanol, but only for food. And no more nukes because of safety issues and radioactive waste, unless they're next generation and don't produce extra heat. We can use the typical New Jersey emissions chart, which is applicable to the state as a whole, or to towns or individuals, as a roadmap for our individual as well as our collective path to zero emissions. This chart shows that transportation, that's the green band at the top, is the largest cause of emissions in New Jersey at 46%. Building space heating is second. And this includes residential, which is the orange band here, or the light green commercial space heating. It's second for a total across those two of 22%. And electricity generation is third at 21%. That's the turquoise band. One other point I'd like to make. You see the orange slice on the right? That's right here. This is actually negative emissions. This is terrestrial carbon sequestration. In New Jersey, we have enough tree and plant cover to sequester 8% of our emissions. This is awesome. Do not cut the trees, whatever you do. Also, we in Middletown for Clean Energy have developed an energy plan for Middletown, but which could be adapted to any town, to the whole state, or to an individual. The goal is 100% clean energy by 2050. It prioritizes steps to be taken toward cutting emissions in the order that produces the greatest savings. The energy plan uses the typical New Jersey emissions on a per capita basis to show which actions would reasonably be expected to have the greatest immediate impact by 2030 in our town, and that if continued to 2050 would result in as close as possible 100% clean energy. The top 3 actions for the 10-year initial period are the green band at the top. 1 is to switch the entire town to renewable electric aggregation. 2 is to replace 1/4 of current passenger cars with EVs, and this is in the next 10 years. And 3 is to begin to electrify space heating for commercial and residential. So how do we get there? First, change to clean electricity immediately in one of these ways. The first option is to install rooftop solar, and that's the best option if you can. The second is to switch to a 100% clean supplier, a third-party supplier. And if you decide to go this way, this website, electric.smiller.org, I'll repeat it, electric.smiller.org, is a chart that Steve made up that shows, as of today, what the prices are for various third-party clean energy supplier, clean electricity suppliers. And you can browse through this, find out if they're actually 100% clean, and choose the cheapest one if that's what you want, or at least know what you're doing. And it takes 5 minutes online to switch your supplier. So it's the easiest thing you could do to save a great deal of emissions. And the third option is to invest in or subscribe to community solar. And the fourth one is to ask your town to supply renewable community choice electrical aggregation for everyone. I'm going to go through some of these and what we have done to get there. So how do we get there? The first option, let me get to this, was solar, if you remember. However, how do you get solar energy to a house that looks like this? This is a Google Earth aerial view of our house. These are 50 or 60-foot trees. We have the sequestration angle around our house covered. I don't know what the percent is, but it's very high, and that's good for us. And you can even smell the clean air around our house. But those trees that you see are twice as high as the house. So there's never going to be any solar collection on this roof. So our next best choice is to switch to a 100% clean electricity supplier, which is what we did. We're getting 100% wind energy from Texas. So it's 100% clean. But that's really only second best, because local is better, because local energy creates local jobs. So we're also looking at the last 2 options, and I'll go through those in a little bit more detail. First of all, we're working on convincing our town to adopt clean energy for the entire town. This would multiply our individual impact by 30,000 households. This would involve getting, and it does involve, getting our neighbors organized to lobby the town officials via campaigns such as Sierra Club's Ready for 100, which is shown in this picture. And here we are, that's Pat on the left, Steve in the middle, and our neighbor, John Leward, on the right. We're in our Middletown for Clean Energy booth at Middletown Day, back when Middletown Day was held live and outdoors. And we're lobbying both our neighbors and the town officials. What we're asking for is community choice aggregation. This involves a New Jersey approved plan where the town provides a contract with a clean energy supplier for all residents and businesses that choose it. And that provides cost savings to residents because of volume buying. And there's no cost to the town at all. Another option we're keeping our eyes on is buying into a local community solar project. And we're looking around for those, but they're still in trial in New Jersey. And hopefully they will become more available in the next few years. And if that's the case, and that's the next best choice we have, we'll choose that. The next step we took personally was to switch to a plug-in EV, which for us was comparable in price to a regular hybrid. This is our PRIUS Prime plug-in hybrid, which we charge with our 100% clean electricity. And this car goes 30 miles on a charge before switching automatically to the hybrid engine. And the hybrid engine itself gets 65 miles per gallon of gas. Here it is being charged in our garage. It gets charged via a regular outlet. It can also be charged with a charger on the road, but normally we're in and around our house. Next, as an individual, we can take energy efficiency measures, such as insulate, seal air leaks, switch to LED lighting, and smart thermostats. Remember, the cheapest energy always is the energy you don't use. We had a $49 home energy audit from New Jersey Clean Energy Program and took all the measures that they recommended. What you see here is on the left, what amounts to a zippered refrigerator bag over the attic stairs. And on the right, lots of additional insulation in the attic. The next step is to start now to switch household appliances to electric when they need to be replaced, and it will take many years probably, because you can choose to, but you don't have to change until they need to be replaced. And when they need to be replaced, it would be silly to replace them with the same gas furnaces if that's what you have. The most important carbon intensive appliance to replace is the gas furnace. When it or an air conditioner needs to be replaced, be sure to switch to an electric heat pump for both heating and cooling. The heat pump does the job of both furnace and air conditioner. It's much more efficient than either, and it provides cleaner, more comfortable air for your house. Please go online after this talk and Google heat pump. It is truly a magical appliance, and you'll never be sorry you did. Other appliances you'll want to start replacing with electric are water heater, stove, and dryer if what you have is gas. The more efficient electric appliances are also getting cheaper. The electricity itself will be dropping in price as the percent renewable goes up. And the price of fracked gas and gasoline will be going up as their government subsidies are phased out. And after today's announcement, I believe that they will be phased out. In fact, I think that's part of the energy plan that's on the table right now, the infrastructure plan. We personally haven't yet switched to the heat pump for home space heating and cooling, although we know people who have been doing it now for 15 years. 15 years ago, we had never even heard of it. But we did buy a heat pump to heat our pool. And there it is outside next to the pool. And you can see on the right, there's the retired gas line that is capped. So we are not using the fracked gas to heat our pool as we used to be doing. And at the same time as the heat pump, we upgraded our electrical circuitry to accommodate the heat pump itself, plus all these electric appliances that I mentioned and as shown on the right that we expect to have. We installed a whole new box on the left, which is the one over here. The original one on the right was full, completely full. And the one on the left now has spares for all these electric appliances, plus a second EV that we plan to have someday. And we're counting on this new Biden's infrastructure plan to upgrade the electric grid to be able to handle all the extra demand that we're putting on it, and that we will be putting on it now, plus to make it more reliable. Because I have to admit, the electrical grid that we have now, we have JCP&L, is not reliable. Here I am enjoying my nice warm pool. You can see it's entirely in the shade, meaning we can't even rely on the sun for directly warming it. So we do need this heat pump. So far, the future I've described doesn't look a whole lot different from our present. Everything here we have known about for decades. It's just that business as usual has driven us farther and farther from our ideal. I think we've reached a tipping point. The majority of us now do agree these changes need to be made. And it is now getting to be both cost effective and not a sacrifice of our quality of life to move toward this environment-friendly ideal. For example, we can now buy plant-based burgers that taste like the real thing, for real. And change can happen in small steps too. For example, say you really like having a good steak once in a while. Suppose you have it once a week instead of every day, or 4 ounces instead of 10. Suppose you replaced half your lawn with nicely landscaped native plants. It would be attractive and less work. Buy carbon offsets for your air travel, or drive to Florida with your family in an EV. In New Jersey, we will soon have less plastic to deal with. Thank you, New Jersey. I'm pretty sure that once the transition starts in earnest, we will get all the way there even sooner than we expected because of innovation and market forces. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point.
So we encourage people to write their questions in the chat so that we can see them. Anybody have any questions?
I don't think there are any questions.
I could unmute. Well, people can unmute themselves. Should I do that? I just did it. So if you have a question and want to do it verbally, just unmute yourself.
Yeah, this is Rich Held.
Yes, hi, Rich.
Great presentation, guys. Thank you so much. And I'm wondering, as Steve knows, because I was talking to you yesterday, Steve, that we're probably going to have to replace our heat, air conditioning, our HVAC later this year. It's about 12 years old, original owner, contractor grade, so it's nothing special. So I am interested in heat pump, but I don't know enough about heat pumps to be totally comfortable that I wouldn't have a hybrid system that would be, is there such a heat pump with a gas furnace to back up the heat pump in case it gets too cold or whatever? That's my question.
Yes, the common thing to do is to keep the furnace in place and install a heat pump, and then the furnace becomes a backup, and that's easy to do. That's assuming that the furnace fan can accommodate the multiple fan speeds required by a heat pump to be efficient. So you can't answer that yourself, but you need to have an HVAC person, by the way, who knows about heat pumps. That may be a little problem until it becomes more common.
We can't recommend any contractor, but if you probably know Phil Blackwood, right?
I do.
Ask Phil who he uses.
Okay.
Yeah. There's also a site, what was it called? NEEP or near?
I think it was NEEP, but
NEP.
It was something about energy efficiency.
Yeah. So there's an organization called NEEP. They maintain a website, and it's all the specs and ranked ordered of all the specs for heat pumps that the HVAC contractor can use. I believe it's NEEP. I can verify it.
I'll check with Phil. Thank you.
Sure. So yes, we do encourage heat pumps. They can be a hybrid, or they can be pure heat pump, because heat pumps actually can stand temperatures down to near zero. And actually in New Jersey, that's where we are, it's very rare. So you don't need gas.
Yeah, and Steve, I think you, I don't think you mentioned that we need to have the low temperature heat pumps. Did you say that?
Yeah, so we don't really need the extraordinarily low, but we need something that's down to maybe 5 degrees. I think they're down to even much lower, like mine. I've heard of minus 17. So yeah, they are available.
They get them down to, if you get them down to 5 degrees, then either they can switch over to the gas furnace, or they can switch over to radiant electricity.
Okay, while we're on the topic of heat pumps, that we have another question about EVs though as well. But tell us more about the heat pump for the pool. What water temperature do you maintain, and what is the added cost of electricity for heating the pool? How effective is it in terms of the time it takes to get the temperature increase desired? Do you run the heat pump all the time, or just when you need the pool party? How much is the heat pump and the installation? Well, a lot of questions there. Yeah, so I personally bought my heat pump. I bought the biggest Hayward heat pump that I could buy. I have online assessments of electricity for a heat pump versus the equivalent heat for gas, and it turns out to be about the same price. That's part of your question, is what's the difference in price? The heat pump, though, even the maximum Hayward is about half the heat capacity of the original fossil fuel furnace heat pump. It wasn't a heat pump, fossil fuel heater for the pool. I'd had that for probably 20 years, 30 years.
Yeah.
And I had bought originally for that, I bought the maximum size fossil fuel pool heater that I could. So comparing the two, it takes about twice the time to raise the temperature using the heat pump than it did with the fossil fuel heater. But the cost of that is roughly the same for doing that once it's done. Do we heat the pool all the time? Not really. I have the pool on a pump on a timer, and probably the timer's on it for about half the day roughly. And so whenever the temperature drops too much, the heat pump comes on and turns on and heats up the pool.
And it is a thermostat, so it stops when it gets to the temperature that
Yeah, it's
that we want it to be. It stops.
It's self-contained.
What is the temperature that you desire to maintain it at? And hello, Millers.
As we get older, you know, we desire more and more warmth. We've actually, by mistake, I've gotten it up to 90.
But no,
that's abnormal.
my bogey is 86. I'm the one that uses it the most, and I use it almost every afternoon. That it's nice.
86.
In summer.
Yeah,
that's
nice. I'd recommend it. That's a good temperature.
Can I come over this summer?
Sure.
We also cover it with a solar blanket.
It's absolutely mandatory. You cover that pool and insulate it at night.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you lose a lot of that heat overnight, like at 1 degree or so, maybe more.
That solar cover, is it basically like bubble wrap?
Yeah, that's what it is. You know what it is, yes.
Now, isn't that kind of heavy and cumbersome to cover and uncover twice a day?
No, we have it down so it takes probably less than 5 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, one person can do it. One person can do it.
One person is all required. There are 3 grades of the solar cover. Low, thick, and the base are thickness characteristics. So low thickness, medium thickness, and high thickness. And that helps determine their lifetime as the plastic degrades with time. I think I settled for a medium grade, and I've been happy with it probably now for at least 10 years.
And how much did that cost you?
Oh, it's pretty cheap, like $60, $70, that ballpark. It's not much.
And is it long-lasting stuff, or you have to replace it every few years?
No, I've had mine now for at least 10 years.
My wife loves to break the bubbles on Bubble Pack. But I have to tie her down, keep her away from it.
Yeah. I always dream about having those plastic balls they use in children's playground areas where you jump in, plastic balls go all over the place, and you can actually swim underneath. And I always dreamt about just covering the whole pool with plastic balls of all colors. That would be pretty, but I've never gone there.
That wouldn't work with those 2 grandsons we have. We're liable to lose them.
That's true. We'd lose them under the water.
Have you had any experience with these? They're like fish that are filled with some kind of alcohol that leaks out and puts a molecular layer that prevents the water from evaporating.
No, I've not heard of that.
To help retain the heat.
I've never. Tell me more. I don't know.
Oh well, they sell them in most of the pool places.
Really?
Yeah.
The next question was how much does this heat pump cost? It's more than a fossil fuel furnace, and I don't remember. Do you remember, Pat? It's like 2,000 some. I can look up the price.
Between 2,000 and 3,000.
Yeah, so that was for the biggest.
But then we had to have the electrical work done too.
Yeah, so the electrical work costs us for putting the second panel and for being prepared for electric everything costs us what, $1,000. So upgrading the electricity costs about $1,000.
Well, as I remember, your pool is a considerable distance from your home, and it's on a slope down at the bottom of the hill, right?
Yeah, but we just run a cable from the garage down to close to where the heat pump is.
Mm-hmm. And
oh, they're talking about power.
Is that cable above ground or below ground?
It's buried, most of it, and then it's in a conduit.
And that pool pump, is it specifically made by Hayward just for pools?
Yes, it is. They have a series of different sizes, and we just bought the maximum. You can actually get a whole low temperature Hayward pool pump pool heater if you wanted to. But you know, the limiting factor is we don't want to go out when it's cold. If their temperature is too much, we won't. So a low temperature pool heater would not make sense for us. Now, this has been a long-winded answer. Installation cost, I don't know. It's cost me probably $50 for the parts. Not much, very little. Installation by somebody else, I don't know. Probably a few $100s, but I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
I hope I answered all those questions.
Answered answers.
The previous question was, did you consider a full EV versus a plug-in hybrid? Yeah, we're cheapskates, and at least I am. And so, yeah, the answer is yes. Plug-in hybrid, the Prius Prime was with discounts on it, was about the same price. It was the previous year's model. I don't even know if my wife knows that, but
Yeah, but
it was actually
no.
about the same price as a standard hybrid. I would never go to ever back to an internal combustion only engine. That just doesn't make sense. The hybrid versions of battery and internal combustion are so well designed that their efficiency of the engine is a lot greater than a standard car. And so I would never go back to internal combustion, but by
And
itself.
according to that, the ratings given it by that AAA, AC, our hybrid, our plug-in hybrid is just as efficient as an all-electric.
Yeah.
So it's right up there at the top.
It's very good. Yeah, the Prius
And-
Prime is one of the top rated green vehicles in the country. I think last year it was first and maybe this year second or something.
And that's because they take everything into account, including, building the battery and that sort of thing.
Yeah, Hep Haven, who's from New Jersey Clean Energy Program, told us, was it yesterday or day before, that he went to a conference last week where the auto manufacturers are really counting on having solid state batteries in the very near future, and that'll be it'll be a game changer, because you'll have much greater capacity at much lower cost, and that'll be really amazing. So I'm a cheapskate, and when that battery full EV is available, I will buy it, but not right now.
Have you heard anything about the structural battery, also called the massless battery?
I think you've mentioned it, but I don't know what it is.
It's a technology where the batteries actually become part of the structural framework of the car. So you're not adding extra weight to the car with all the batteries. They are actually part of the structure of the car.
Well, that sounds ideal. Providing
Yeah, so they work.
I'm an electrical engineer, and anything that will happen does happen when you have high volume. So I'd hate for that structural battery to decompose in the sunlight and start short-circuiting. You'd be driving around a sparkler.
Yeah,
Steve, are you seeing any more questions?
Yeah. There is a one. How does one purchase carbon offsets? Well, it's pretty easy if you. But I give you a caveat. When you're flying, like many airlines have an option for buying carbon offsets now, and some of them are pretty cheap. And you need to be careful of what you invest in, because the actual social cost of carbon now is what, around 50? Somebody came up with $50. And what I saw from United a couple of years ago was like $10. And so what I think they're that's per ton. What is it? $10 per ton. And so that's really buying something that is not really very effective as an offset. So how do you do it? Well, it's easy by using the airlines. You can also Google and find sources. You can buy into plantations. You can buy into community solar type, large solar systems. There's many different things you could buy into for carbon offsets.
Yeah, you can go online and look up carbon offsets and find a lot of different options that let you pay as much as you want to pay per whatever is ton of carbon, or not just the airline, but if you're on a trip that uses air plus maybe part of it's by boat or part of it's by bus. I mean, you can cover the whole trip if you just estimate how much you're using.
Yep. So the next question was, what's our take on green hydrogen? Why don't we see much of it in the conversation? Uh, I've been watching. I'm pretty much up to date on using hydrogen. I'm a believer that it's a really viable alternative. The problem is it's too costly now. The common way to create it is by using fossil fuel, and then split the fossil fuel. You end up with blue carbon, I guess, or whatever. It's actually based on using polluting type inputs, and then you end up with hydrogen. The best way to go is to take your electricity from like your solar and use that to have an electrolysis process with plain water, and you split it into hydrogen and oxygen. I've done that as a kid. I remember my little experiments back many years ago, and it's still viable. They use better electrolytes now, and there's a lot of research to figure what the best way is. There's some means, in fact, including like ammonia as a storage element. I think that's what it was. But there's a lot of work.
We've also heard that there are cars that run on hydrogen, yeah. and maybe there will be more of them as we get more of a source for the hydrogen. But also we were told in the last Climate Reality session that we were in that they're going to be using hydrogen. It's a good alternative for commercial processes like creating concrete or steel. And so where commercial is probably going to be or industrial, I shouldn't say commercial, where industrial processes are going to be the hardest nut to crack, that hydrogen may be the thing that cracks them.
Yeah.
Have you seen the movie At War with the Dinosaurs?
No.
You should. I highly recommend that to give you a really good overview of hydrogen and green hydrogen specifically. And I just, it's hard for me to understand why I don't, after seeing that film, why I don't see more, like I said, more.
Yeah, it's because it's too expensive compared to other energy sources. It takes a lot of energy to create that green hydrogen, but the price, a lot of work on it, and the price is coming down. The other thing, I hate to turn people off, but one of the possible sources of cheap green hydrogen is to use nuclear plants. You have two outputs. One is heat, and there's processes now involving creation of green hydrogen that if you put enough heat in it, it becomes a cheap way to make hydrogen. And of course, electricity output then adds to splitting the molecules into hydrogen out. And so there's a couple of projects now around the country using nuclear plants, and to create green hydrogen. And I hope that turns out. I'd like to have the nuclear plants replaced with highly safe modular small reactors. I would love to see that. That may happen someday as well.
Yes, I've seen information on the small, I think they're sodium cooled reactors that supposedly don't create as much waste.
Right.
Are you seeing any other questions, Steve? I'm not seeing any of these questions.
You're not? Oh, need to go for grandfather duty. Oh yeah, please send a recording of the presentation. What we do is, but at the end of our series of presentations this week, we will collect all the RSVPs, the data, and your emails, and we'll send back the link to the recording and the link to the materials for each of the presentations. I would like to tell you, though, put a little plug in for some of the things happening now. Tonight, I'm going to put these into the chat. And Pat, can you show that slide?
Yeah, I'm going to get there. I thought I was at the end, but somehow I ended up at the beginning. Okay, here we go. There. Okay, can you see that? And Steve is going
Yes.
to put the links in the chat. So let me just go ahead and talk while he's putting the links in. This evening at 7 p.m. is the Empower group. Time to stop building fossil fuel infrastructure. This is something that we personally and our organization and Sierra Club and have been involved in, and they'll present, and it's to ask for a moratorium, to get a moratorium on any new fossil fuel infrastructure. So that's what they're going to be talking about tonight. And tomorrow night, Friday at 7 p.m. also, dirt, sun, and 0 to 60 miles per hour in 3 seconds. And this is someone we know from Sierra Club, Dennis Anderson, who's going to talk about combining perfect topsoil, which he has in his yard, a rain garden, and maximum solar panels, which he has on his house, and the 2 Tesla EVs that he has.
He has that her.
Yeah, to preserve the environment. So that's going to be really interesting.
Oh, also, Ariane Benray is a director of solar and community solar policy for New Jersey BPU. And so we really have the pleasure of having her come and talk to us. So if you want to know any of the details about solar and community solar, please come tomorrow night, 7 p.m. And you'll hear from the source of all these rules and regulations governing solar and community solar. So we appreciate you all joining us.